right now I have Andrew Banning, our housing experts. The reason they popped in is because Reading had the fastest rising house prices in the whole of the country for August, and prices in Reading of homes are now nearly 15% higher than a year before. That's the second biggest annual rise in England and Wales, and it leaves the average house price in Reading now just £5,000 shy of 300 grand. So, I mean, I look at my children, they're 15 and 13. Their first house is a long way off. Actually, I often wonder, will they ever be able to buy a house? So here to discuss this with me is Andrew Banning, who's Director of Virtuoso Property Management Limited and author of the Reading Property blog. Big titles, guys. You obviously know what you're talking about. Andrew, does that mean this is going to continue, this trend?
I think predictions on where prices are going to go are very dangerous, but I've only got to look at the drivers that are out there that drive the market, and there are many drivers, but the profile of buyer is changing in the market. We've got to understand that we go to a market where investors have very limited vehicles for investment in terms of their cash deposits or money that they're taking out of their pension pots, which of course are things we haven't had in the past. So we've got people with money with limited avenues in terms of investment to get any type of return, and our market is changing and it's being driven. There's always a herd mentality in markets, but the herd is changing, so a lot of it's being driven by investors who are looking for yields, who are less bothered about capital growth and prices over the short term because they're buying the property for a long term to generate an income that they've lost perhaps elsewhere. So I think the general trend will be upwards. I mean, there's some other things to take into account. The amount of properties on the market has dropped by 80% since 2008.
80%?
80%.
So is that 80% less property available?
Available on the market. We have the lowest median time on the market.
But the population's going up. I hate to state the obvious, but I mean, that's a crisis, isn't it?
There's certainly a limit of supply in terms of properties. We do a lot of investment articles for people looking at trends, and the trends are all very much driving supply and demand in favour of sellers. And if you've got that lack of properties on the market, that's only going to drive prices upwards.
Andrew, do you see first-time buyers being able to get onto the market comfortably?
I think it's always been difficult to buy a house. I think in terms of buying of going through that process, it's always been tough to save a deposit. I remember when I bought my first flat in 1988, you needed a 10% deposit in those days. That was 10% of a £66,000 property, and interest rates were at 16.5% then. Yeah. Now you need to find a 5% deposit before you can go forward, and a one-bed flat you can buy for £135,000. So the deposit figure you need actually hasn't changed that much. Within a couple of £100, it's close. It's just always been difficult. I think what buyers need in a far more complex market, especially in Reading, is more help and advice, because the market has got a lot more complicated than it was when we were buying houses 20, 30 years ago. There's a lot more choice in terms of funding. There's a lot more, there's just many different areas that you need to look at. And I think if you can find the right advice, it's difficult. It's always been difficult, but there is help. We've had the Help to Buy scheme recently from the government, which has helped. But there have been social changes. For example, we didn't leave university with massive debts, which of course people are doing now, and perhaps there's other things that have happened in that time that have made it slightly more difficult.
Well, we shall look forward to more of your advice in a moment, but we'll take a pause here on BBC Radio 1. Thank you. My guests this hour are some housing experts. We've got Andrew Banning, because Reading has had the fastest rising house prices in the whole country for August, and it's pricing, it seems to me, a whole generation out of the housing market. And while you're renting, rents are high, you can't save for a deposit. I mean, so are we turning into a county of renters? People just can't buy here anymore, Andrew.
I think there is a social change generally happening, and yes, I think that the journey towards a more European style of housing market has started. You've only got to look at the census figures for Reading between 2001 and 2011, which was the last census, where we saw the amount of rental properties, privately rented properties, increasing by nearly 90% in the area. So
that's a huge jump.
Yeah, there is obviously demand out there.
So are there enough rental properties? We talked about investors buying up properties, but I mean, is there going to be a shortage of rented property as well?
There is a shortage now of rental properties. I think and there's many things, may I say, I think that, and there's many drivers in the market, there always is, whether it's housing or whatever commodity that we're talking about. But one thing we're not doing, of course, is building social housing, anything like the levels necessary to help take up the slack. It's private landlords now who are sensing an opportunity, and they're taking too much of that marketplace, and there's not enough available in the social sector.
And Andrew, would you say that that's the only way this is going to change, is if more houses are built? Is there anything else that can happen that will somehow make life a little bit more affordable?
Well, supply and demand is a key driver in the market, and that's certainly going to help. I don't see where the help can come from elsewhere, because we threw a lot of medicine at the market in the crash in 2008, and interest rates are already very, very low. They can't go any lower. Really, the direction of travel for those is going to be upwards. It's just a matter of when, and there's a lot of debate to be had over that. So if we want prices to go down of any asset, we need to have more of the asset than we do of the buyer. That's basic.
More houses, please. That's what we're saying here on BBC Radio Berkshire this morning. BBC Radio Berkshire Morning. I'm Sue, temporarily in the chair for Anne. I'm very glad to be with you. I am. We've been talking housing this hour because Reading had the fastest rising house prices in the whole country for August. Prices in Reading are now nearly 15% higher than a year before, and that is the second biggest annual rise anywhere in England and Wales. And discussing this with me this morning is Andrew Banning, who's Director of Virtuoso Property Management Limited and author of the Reading Property blog. I mean, those, Andrew, are quite frightening statistics when you read them out. Reading is exploding.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And
it is.
Do you think that's a good thing?
I think sometimes we have to understand what it is that drives market forces, and there's many influences. Some we've touched on this morning, some of course we haven't got time, but sometimes you just have a perfect storm,
Yes.
Coming over something, and everything is positive. On the plus side, we should be pleased. It's great for the town, it's great for the area. Reading's a great place to be, to live and to work at the moment, so there's always positives.
Yes.
To the negative, although it has become difficult for people to get on the housing ladder.
What kind of stories, people come to you for advice and help.
Yep.
So what kind of stories have you been hearing from them?
I think there's a lot of drivers, the vast majority of people who are coming to us for advice and investment advice are maybe older people who are downsizing, whose pensions are not paying them what they had expected. The majority of them are sitting on vast profits over 30, 40, maybe 50 years in their house, and they have an opportunity to downsize, perhaps because the plot or the garden is too much for them. Now they can buy a flat, and they can release some equity, and they can invest in properties then that generate them an income that they've lost through their pensions. We have a lot of foreign investors ringing who are sending students over. We have a fantastic university here. Our last foreign investor was a Malaysian gentleman whose daughter's coming over here for 4 years. He didn't want her to be in a halls of residence. He found the blog all the way over there, would you believe, and engaged and said, look, I want to buy a flat.
It's a small world now.
It is, and he said, why am I not buying a property? He looks at the figures like you do and where he is in that part of the world and thinks, do you know what, I should put some money there. My daughter is safe.
Yes.
So what's happening in
a
the
way,
market?
investors like that are pricing the rest of us and my children out, aren't they?
It's bringing more people, Sue, into the market. Our market is more global now. Before, when we were buying houses, and this is in many areas, it was a very insular island. Now trade barriers are down, and people look on a far more global way. We have far more access to far more information about markets to spot trends, and we just have a lack of other avenues for people with money to invest, to take that money down and get a sensible level of return. And of course we have a fascination with property. We understand property, it's in our veins as Brits, so people tend to pile their money into something that they understand a bit better, whereas the pension world has become very difficult to understand. So we have a lot of drivers driving it in an upward
It's a
direction.
time of great change, and one of the things that strikes me is that an Englishman's home, is his castle, so they say, but actually we're turning into a county of renters, aren't we? The home castle thing, it's going to be harder and harder to achieve.
There's certainly been a decrease in home ownership since the last two censuses. It dropped for the first time from just over 63% to 54% in the census from 2001 and 2011, which was the last census. And in that same period, the amount of rental properties nearly doubled. They went up by 90%. So there is a trend going towards renting. But don't forget, we have far more transient lifestyles with job. There's a lot of accidental landlords who have become a landlord and a tenant by accident through work. So in the olden days, you'd sell your home, and because you were moving to another part of the country for a long period of time, you're not doing that now. A lot of people are having a 3-year contract, perhaps somewhere elsewhere, so they keep their property here, they rent that one out, they become a landlord, and then they go and rent a property elsewhere. So there's many, many reasons.
And do you think that it is still possible out there to find a bargain to buy or to rent? Is that possible or not?
I think you've got to define what you think a bargain is.
Yeah.
Are you going to, in a market where we have the lowest median time on the market at 31 days in Reading compared to other towns locally like Newbury, but you might look at Bracknell or Maidenhead, when the amount of property on the market has dropped by 80% since May 2008. I think you've got to be realistic. You can find a bargain if you can get the right advice. But you're going into a marketplace that has changed, where people now are making their livings and their investments out of property. This wasn't happening so much 20 years ago. I mean, the market has changed, and you're going into a very specialised market, needing very specialised advice to try and find that bargain. But are you going to trip in and steal a house? No.
And more people building their own as well. That's another huge sea change. You see all over the place one-off designed houses. Is that something that is more affordable now?
I think it is. Obviously, as housing goes up, land goes up.
Yeah.
That tends to happen more if you're able to have a plot that you can divide. And of course you can fund it. I mean, funding's another key. It's fine having these ideas if you can make it work on a financial level, but yes, it's certainly something a lot of people have done. They used to call it garden grabbing, I think, many years ago, and it's happening less, but that is still being done. Yes, that's still going on.
Andrew, thank you very much for
it's a pleasure.
coming in and illuminating us. I'm not sure if I feel cheered or more depressed, but certainly housing, major issue of our times. You are listening to BBC Radio.